Shalom, shalom, everybody. Ariel Tzadok here from the KosherTorah School, found online at www.koshertorah.com. We are now, this is actually lesson number 3 in a series of what I call Torah Basics 101 Plus. Because, well, whenever I teach the basics, it might not be as basic as others. But I got to share with you this pause here because today, just to time date us, it's the 10th of May, 2021. And today is a very, very special day for myself and my siblings. Because today, if he would have been alive, would have been my father's 100th birthday. So in honor of my father, Aharon ben Haim, and of course my mother, Martha Batsara. Hey guys, hey mom and dad, I hope I'm doing okay. Hope wherever you are up there, you're smiling down and saying, that's a good boy. My father always wanted me to become a businessman. I should have listened. But tonight, we are going to talk, as they say in the Ashkenazi dialect, tachlis, real deal stuff about what it means to convert to Judaism. Now, I've dabbled in this in our previous 2 classes in this series. But right now, I want to address the real deal. I want to address Noahide movement. I want to address Kabbalah, the concept of the Jewish soul and all this, because when you want to talk about Jewish basics, all right, I mean, it's real simple to read the 13 principles of Maimonides. And you know something? Let's start there. Because I've shared this in our previous classes here, and this is vital for us to understand today. When we're talking about conversion to Judaism, okay, that's a loaded term. Why? Let me give you an example. All right, this is just an example, mind you. I am going to hold a black tie dinner party, and of course you're invited. At this black tie dinner party, of course, dress is formal. That is why it's called black tie. It would be most inappropriate and you would be most unwelcome if you showed up in shorts or jeans or in a t-shirt and a hoodie. A black tie affair is a black tie affair. Hopefully this is understood. Now, after that, we're going to go to the ball game. Let's go up to Boston. Boston, am I pronouncing it correctly? Boston. And we're going to go see the Boston Red Sox. But I will give you one word of wise advice. If you're going to Fenway, what is it? I forgot the name of the park up there. To see the Red Sox, thou shalt not, you like that, wear a Yankees cap. You wear a Yankees cap in Boston, you're asking for trouble. Mind you, if you go to Yankee Stadium wearing a Boston cap in reverse, you're equally asking for trouble. And also, just for the record, if you're going to Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, you don't wear a San Francisco Giants hat either. You dress for the occasion. I'm having a barbecue in the backyard. So therefore, shorts and jeans and t-shirts and hoodies are the appropriate dress. You're not going to show up at a tux and tie now, are you? Everything has its proper place. When it comes to converting to Judaism, you must remember that term Judaism is a loaded term. Because at one time, the word Judaism meant Torah. And therefore you come to embrace the Torah. That's not true anymore. Originally speaking, and here we are now 1 week away from Shavuot, which is, of course, the holiday in which we commemorate Matan Torah, the giving of Torah. And therefore, to sum up conversion, our sages say, if one wishes to embrace the Torah, then symbolically speaking, just like the children of Israel who were at Mount Sinai and their descendants after them were there. It says that in Deuteronomy, right? Because within the DNA and stuff, you're in your parents' parents' parents way back. So we were technically all there. Well, you got to go to Sinai. And you got to receive and embrace the Torah from Sinai. And what that means, like it said in the Bible, the Torah, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hear. Wait a second. Isn't that reversed? I mean, how am I supposed to do something if I don't know what it is I'm supposed to do? So I hear and obey. No, you obey and hear. And using Gemara language, what is the nafka mina? What's the difference? And this is a very important difference. It's a matter of your commitment. And this is a big deal with regards to those interpretations of Torah and Judaism that have come along and have weakened their foundations to the point that we of the Torah tradition can no longer consider them legitimate. And that is this. When you say, Nishma v'na'aseh, I'm going to listen and then I will follow. Which means, and this is one of the warnings of the rabbis, if you think that the commandments of the Torah are subject to our interpretation and understanding, and they all make rational, proper sense, and therefore, out of logic, you observe, you are sadly mistaken in the nature of Torah. Now, with regards to the 10 Commandments, pretty much the vast majority, if not them all, kind of makes sense if you think about it. When we say, I am Hashem, right, brought you out of slavery, and the Hashem Elokecha, she'otzetechem eretz Mitzrayim, mipei tovadim, right, and all the rest. Okay, what does that mean? It's kind of like simple. Acknowledge that there is a higher power. When Maimonides opens up the laws of the foundations of Torah, the first law he brings down, recognize there is what he calls a matsui rishon, a primal or primordial existence. Very interesting when you look at how Maimonides tries to prove the existence and presence of God. He's often using Aristotelian philosophy to do so. Very interesting take, but that's for another time. So, if you think that all the commandments are rational, let's review some. Okay? Understanding God and the concept of freedom, I get that, makes sense. The United States of America and those systems based on it were built upon that premise. If you go into the writings of the founding fathers of this country, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, these guys were all Masons. And they were very adept, believe it or not, even in our Kabbalah, and therefore endeavored to create this country as the fulfillment of the Enlightenment dream of freedom. How's the experiment gone? We're not going to get into politics. But anyway, all right, have no other gods before me. Actually, it says al panai, which means on my face. All right, don't call something God that's not. Now, let's not get into arguments and fights over different religions. I have always addressed this psychologically. One of the greatest sources or commentary on that I take from the psychologist Erich Fromm in his book, Psychology and Religion, where he says anything that we deify and elevate and look to be our source of sources, that's become a modern day idol. And he says political philosophies and nationalisms and all the rest have become modern day idols. And if you look at the psychological understanding of idolatry, that's right. The good professor is correct. So when we need to address issues of idolatry today, it is not pointing finger at this or that religion and their interpretation of God. At least they have a concept of God. It may or may not be accurate according to understandings, but at least that's the way to look at it. It's not totally something else. Moving down the line. We all know the fundamental commandments, all right? No graven images, no taking God's name in vain. In other words, you don't lie. Oh, isn't that a good thing? And you honor your parents. You show respect to authority and elders. The Sabbath. You know something? The Sabbath has always been understood as an expression unique to Judaism. But if you look at the prayers when we recite for the Sabbath, the Kiddush prayer, we say that the Sabbath is due to two different causes, or two different reasons why we observe it. One, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, in the remembrance of the Exodus of Egypt. Now, not everybody is historically the descendants of those who exited Egypt. But the message of freedom, I think that's a universal message applicable to everyone. And the other one, Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, remembrance of creation. Somehow I think that the concept of creation is kind of applicable to everybody. So the concept of a Sabbath, I think, is pretty universal too. And if you kind of look around the world, except for in radical secular societies, the concept of a Sabbath has pretty much been embraced. They didn't say the observance, they said a concept. The ritual observances has evolved for our observances in Judaism. But like I said, not everybody is Jewish. We're going to get to talk about that in a minute. Going down the line. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, right? Thou shalt not commit adultery. Do we really need this to be understood? Is this not common sense? These are considered universal laws. But in our society today, good Lord, I mean, the perversion, I'm stumbling over my words simply because what I see happening on a day-to-day basis. Remember, I'm a counselor, and I hear things that people do in their lives, and I go, oh my gosh, what happened to the common sense? Okay. I think we all understand and know thou shalt not kill. Actually, it says thou shalt not murder, because there is the appropriate legal reasons and purpose for killing people. If you shed the blood of men, like man, your blood is shed. If somebody's out to harm you, you are allowed to harm them, etc. Stealing, any and every which way, there's so much theft that it's become an integral part of our society. Pretty much everything today is theft. What are you going to do? Adultery? I'm not going to go there. Oh my gosh. The types of perversions, weird stuff that goes on these days. I can't believe that this stuff is like just so out there. And I'm not talking about just in the realms of pornography. I mean, I read about these things, online on the front page of newspapers, that this one proclaims I do this, and that one proclaims I do that, and they're married, and they do all kinds of weird stuff. So what happened to basic concepts of morality? Gone. All right? Coveting, jealousy, and all the rest. This is all basic stuff. I think we all understand this, yes? Now, Na'aseh, and only then Nishma. Well, the Ten Commandments, okay, I get it. Everybody gets it. Who's going to sit here and actually argue with me and say, well, Rabbi, committing murder or theft or adultery, it's not really that bad. Yeah, I mean, I still love God. It's just that I love going around raping and pillaging and murdering and killing. I mean, guys got to make a living. no one, I certainly hope and pray, no one's going to argue that. But now, we have other laws. And I'm not even talking rabbinic stuff yet. I'm talking biblical stuff. Laws that, well, some don't really make a lot of sense. Indeed, there's an entire body of law that the rabbis call hukot. All right? Hukot means, hold on a second. Somebody is making a comment here that is not accurate, according to Jewish law. Taking God's name in vain requires inclusion of whatever, blah, 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 foul language. No, foul language is not taking God's name in vain. That has nothing to do with it. If you were to say GD, darn it, or whatever, and stuff like that, or use the S word or the F word, and you were swearing so-and-so, that's not taking God's name in vain. That might be potty mouth, but that's very, very different. Okay, getting back to the point here. When we want to come and look at these laws, remember I said hukot. Well, there's another set of laws called mishpatim, which are the laws that kind of make sense. Now, when you look at the Bible, you will see laws that were instituted 3,500 years ago, and in those days, in age compared to the Code of Hammurabi, which was the law of the day in the Babylonian context, and I most certainly didn't, write this stuff. The book's out there. The Torah code was radical in the protections that it extended to slaves and others. And you say, well, how did the Torah even allow it? Well, like I said, 3,500 years ago, things were different then. And the Torah was radical then in underlying and presenting to us foundational ideas that when we take into modern times, we see where the Torah was going with this stuff. But the laws are obviously still in effect, but we don't have slavery anymore. So the laws of slavery are no longer applicable, as many of the other laws from 3,500 years ago. Now, here's an interesting one of these laws that make no sense, and that is the law of the red heifer. The red heifer is this red cow, and its ashes were used to bring people to a state of ritual purity. According to its instructions in the book of Numbers, you had to have a special priest. He went out and he slaughtered the animal, and he became unclean. And then he would bring the ashes, and they would in turn make people clean. So how does it make somebody unclean and clean at the same time? Who the heck understands all of this stuff? Now, Maimonides, the rationalist, he would say, something? All of these things were specifically designed and had a context of meaning within the milieu, meaning the day and the age, that when people read those words more like in a vernacular, they understood its application. And the whole purpose of the Torah was specifically to wean us off of idolatry. Now, for Maimonides, what is idolatry? No, not this or that religion, but like I quoted earlier from Eric Fromm, religion and psychology and religion, anything that we deify that doesn't belong. And unfortunately, that's a whole bunch of stuff. So, Maimonides' point of the purpose of the commandments is to, as a whole, as an archetype, guide us in the proper psychology. Okay, this is why we say then na'aseh first. We will do. All right, we will do, and then we will hear. Because when you have hukot that are weird, and you don't understand, you don't just say, well, I don't understand the logic of that, so I'm going to convert to Judaism with the exception of this law or that law, because it really doesn't make sense, or it's not applicable, or this or that. This is the symbolic meaning of a very famous story that's recorded in the Talmud, Tractate Shabbat, of an individual who came to the two great leaders of the Jewish schools in the days of the Second Temple, Shammai and Hillel. And a guy was being provocative. He was being obnoxious. Comes first to the great leader of House Shammai and says, I want you to convert me to Judaism in the time that I can balance myself standing on one foot. Shammai recognizes this guy's a BS artist, has no patience for such disrespect, and says, get out of here. Fine. The guy then goes to Hillel. Hillel is known to be a little bit more patient. Here he says again to Hillel, hey, teach me all of Judaism and convert me in the time I can balance myself on standing on one foot. Hillel says, okay, I'm going to give it to you. What you yourself don't like, don't do to somebody else. He says, this is the entire meaning of the Torah and the prophets, because they didn't have Ketuvim at the time. Zil Gamar. Go and do it. Bye. The original golden rule. That's where it comes from. The focus of the commandments is personality, character, transformation. It's always been this. So therefore, what is the purpose and the focus of conversion? Well, we just said, it means coming back to Mount Sinai. But what does that mean? Na'aseh v'nishma. First, you make a commitment to embrace the whole. And let me tell you something. No one knows the whole. As much as all of us great and holy rabbis, we study our lifetimes away, there's always something we don't know. And when it comes to observance, well, when it comes to the embrace of idea and belief, there's always something we don't know. And there's always going to be that which is difficult and hard. And that is when you have to say, Na'aseh v'nishma. Let me give you a real good example of this. Just under 100 years ago, the Jews of Eastern Europe faced the crisis of extinction. I'm talking, of course, about the Holocaust. All their prayers went, for the most part, what we would think unanswered. And millions were lost. The survivors were traumatized. They had absolutely no forgiveness in their hearts and no patience for a God who would allow such a trauma to happen to an entire nation. Which, if you look at the history of life, the Holocaust, the murder of 6 million, these things have happened many a time in the past. And unfortunately, even after the Holocaust. What happened in Soviet Russia, what happened in communist China, made what Hitler did pale by comparison. But another story for another time. But these people walked away from God angry and said, you know what? I am going to, well, they said, we need a homeland of our own. And God can go blankety blank himself. He's not going to give it to us, we'll take it. And they fought tooth and nail to create the state of Israel. And we can argue back and forth about the poor innocent Palestinians, or not they're poor or innocent, but like I said, that's politics. But these people built, and they turned their weakness and their remorse into resolve, and they hardened themselves. And they succeeded to this day to establish a very firm and vital and secure and strong state. And no matter what happens in the world today, the state of Israel will never go down alone. Right? Samson options, they call it. But these arrogant, anti-religious people accomplished something that the religious people couldn't accomplish for 1,800 years. And you want to know something? Go back 1,000 years before into the writings of Rabbi Saadia Gaon in his book Emunot and Deot. And he wrote very clearly that in the end of days, when the time of Mashiach would come nigh and the children of Israel to be gathered in, if the righteous, or he actually says if the people were not worthy of it, then God would allow the wicked to come and gather in the people as opposed to the righteous. And you have many writers in modern times who have said what Rabbi Saadia Gaon wrote was prophetic, because that's indeed what has happened. So this leads to an understanding of God helps those who help themselves. But that is also part and parcel of the Torah message. Example, the children of Israel went forth from Egypt, chamushim, which meant armed. When they came to the Red Sea, God says, Hashem Yelechem Lechem Etem Taharishun. Stand back, God says, I'll take care of business with the Egyptians. Right? I got a cheshbon to pay with them. So God parts the Red Sea, the children of Israel go through, and that's it. They get to the other side. A couple weeks later, they get attacked by Amalek. If you read the Bible story very clearly, no firebolts from heaven came down, no earthquakes, no angelic army. No, the people had to go out there with their swords and they had to fight, and they got killed, and they lived and learned. That's the way it is. Now, na'aseh v'nishma. It's almost a military mentality. You do because you embrace. Somebody's asking me, is it the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds? Who cares? Yam Suf, we call it in Hebrew. How you translate it in English is completely irrelevant. But getting back now to the whole concept of conversion. Before we can address conversion, you got to ask, converting to what? It's like the example I gave. If you're going to an occasion, what is your dress? Well, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to a black tie formal? Do you want to go to a Boston game? Do you want to come to a barbecue in my backyard? Where do you want to go? They are different. So just because something today is called Judaism doesn't mean that it is. And that is where all the confusion in the world comes today. Now, in Christianity, which, as you know, bases the legitimacy of its form of religion on doctrinal issues. In other words, what you believe. So individual churches will say, well, if you don't believe XYZ, then you're not a, if you'll allow me to say the word, kosher church. Okay, well, in Judaism, it's a little bit different. You see, our, in quote, doctrinal beliefs, you can believe all you want. I mean, think about it. Even in the most liberal, unreligious, or even anti-religious forums, how many people are really violating or disagreeing with, better word, disagreeing with something like the Ten Commandments? How many people are out there really saying, you know what? Yeah, you know, to be Jewish, yeah, you could worship all the other gods. You're still Jewish, right? You could be a pirate, go kill people, and you know, steal and rape, pillage, and murder, and all. I mean, you know, as long as you're a nice Jewish person, and you come to Minyan in time, you know, are you insane? It doesn't work like that. And the most liberal of groups don't talk like this. But that's where the talk stops. What is real conversion? Well, we have the Shulchan Aruch. I got it printed out here from Sefaria. And the Shulchan Aruch was written, again, ballpark about 1570. Right? Rabbi Yosef Karo, Code of Jewish Law. And sums up the practices that pretty much the majority embrace. Now, you should know for the record, since the days of the Second Temple, we have interpreters of the law, the Perushim, who led to the others called the Amoraim and the Savoraim and the Gaonim and the Rishonim, all these different generations of rabbis and opinions. And as life goes on, there has been established a system. And I confess, nowhere did God proclaim, thus saith the Lord, thou shalt obey the rabbis of the Babylonian Talmud. But it does say in Deuteronomy, when there is a question of law which is too difficult for you, you shall go to the priest or Levite or judge in your day, and you better listen to what they say. Well, the rabbis are the ones who, because of their study of Torah and their embrace, they are the ones whose main purpose and focus is to keep the coherence of the community, which means to establish a comprehensive path of practice, which therefore unites a community. So, in the olden days, you had the greater community of Eretz Israel and the greater communities of Bavel. And all the rabbis in those areas, they spoke with this, they spoke with that, and they came to consensus to define what is and isn't appropriate expressions and interpretations of Torah. We call this, of course, Rabbinic Judaism. And, needless to say, that continued from generation to generation, and each generation was connected to the past like links in a chain. And we established precedent. Anyone who's an attorney knows and understands the concept of law, understands and knows the concept of precedent in law. Well, Jewish law is not really any different. When you become a proper Torah rabbi, you're kind of like a lawyer. Now, na'aseh v'nishma. Not only are you committing to embrace the Torah from Sinai, you're committing to embrace the continuity of that, which is the rabbinic chain of history and command, the Masorah. So therefore, today, when we convert people, we bring them to the point of acceptance and embrace of Judaism, Torah Judaism, as it is today. Now, that opens up a can of worms because we need to ask, well, what exactly or how exactly is Judaism today? So, let's just review some of the basics. Someone in text is asking here, is kosher optional, meaning kosher food? Of course not. The Bible said very clearly you have to eat kosher food. And therefore, that is the law. Now, how and what is kosher? Well, that you need to turn to your rabbis, who will instruct you and guide you as to what that means. Obvious, you know the obvious stuff, right? You don't eat shellfish. You don't eat pork, right? Big stuff. But also issues of not mixing meat and dairy. But then we go into minutiae of the application of these things, and there you're going to find flexible opinions. For example, in the traditional Orthodox practice, if you eat a meat meal, you're supposed to wait 6 hours until you are allowed to have a dairy meal. But that law, believe it or not, is not written in stone. As a matter of fact, there are numerous other opinions, and some will wait as little as an hour. And that's all kosher and legitimate if that is the practice of your context and community. But what you do not do, remember I spoke about communal continuity. You do not go into a community which has an established way about it and say, I'm going to do things differently simply because I can. It's like you showing up to my black tie dinner wearing shorts and a t-shirt simply because you can. Well, no, you can't. No, you shouldn't. That's wrong. So, if you are going to be in a specific community and you embrace that community, you're supposed to embrace the ways and means of that community. But what happens now when people split off from that community and create their own? Well, there is some semblance of continuity, sometimes and sometimes not. So, here in the West, specifically in the United States, when Jews became more and more accepted into the greater culture, many became less and less ethnically identifiable. So when Jews lived in, for example, Eastern Europe, and were forced by many time edict of law to be ethnically different, identifiably different, well, that's the way it was. They lived by themselves and they created their own rules and communities and the like. Remember? As we say in Hebrew, al tifrosh min hatzibur. You go follow the community rule. But now you come here. This is like saying the late 1700s, 1800s. And you're living in places like Charleston or Rhode Island or any of these other communities in which even if you are Jewish, you're still a regular person. And as such, you could integrate into the greater community. Your ethnic external identity may be watered down. I don't want to say compromised because that indicates something negative. But at the same time, many of these individuals were completely observant of kosher, completely observant of the laws of the Sabbath, prayers, and the like. Covering the head with the kippah, that's a tradition, believe it or not. It's not even an obligation. And let's extend that now to women. Yes, you do have today born, raised, Orthodox Jewish women who do not cover their hair when they're married and who do wear pants. So, even in an Orthodox circle today, even though it is not the norm, if you are in an environment in which you can or do, as a married woman, wear a pantsuit or not cover your hair, there are those places where that is acceptable. But if you're moving into an ultra-Orthodox community, needless to say, it is not acceptable and should not be looked at as tolerable because it's just not there. Same thing. If you're going to live in an Orthodox community as a man, you wear a kippah. If you're a rabbi, I'm expected to cover my head, so I do. It's just the tradition. But now, conversion. Here's the interesting question. I was contemplating this all day. Can one embrace the religion of Judaism and not be Jewish? What do you think? Let's say you're just a regular everyday person, you weren't born of a Jewish mother or anything of the kind, and you study all the world religions. You've studied them all. And you say, Judaism is the one that makes the most sense. I like it. And I believe in it. That means you believe in Judaism. Does that make you a Jew? What say you? Any answers in text? Well, I'm getting people here saying yes, yes, yes. The answer, of course, is no, no, no. Yes, Judaism can be a religion, but that does not make you a Jew. There's a big difference between the two. And that is where a lot of confusion comes in, especially today. And that is really one of the reasons for this class. You see, Judaism is or has become a religion. There are a whole bunch of books out there. People read the books. People enjoy the books. People embrace the concepts. They like the concepts. So many people study Kabbalah. They say, oh, I like this, etc. Great. So therefore you embrace these ideas, these concepts, etc. That does not make one to be a Jew. You are identifying with the Judaism. A lot of people could do that, but that does not make one a Jew. The big question, what is a Jew? Is it a member of a nation? Well, if we are going to say that we are a nation, don't confuse that with the nation of modern Israel, because you have many citizens in the state of modern Israel who are very religious, proud, and devout Christians, Druze, and even Muslims, all of whom may be serving in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and yet they're not Jewish. They're members and citizens of a Jewish state, but being a citizen of the state of Israel and a member of the Jewish people are completely different things. So what does it mean to become a member of the Jewish people? You could say, well, a person of the Jewish bloodline. What is a Jewish bloodline? Is there really a Jewish? What is Jewish? It's from Judah, right? You know, when we talked about going back to Sinai, how many tribes stood at Sinai? 12, right? Are you a Reubenite, a Shimonite, a Gadite, a Danite? You have all the crazy people out there that say, yeah, I'm an Ephraimite. Well, where's your genealogy to prove your bloodline? Well, it's spiritual. Okay? Well, you know what? I'm a spiritual, I don't know what. Make it up. I like to make things up, right? Say whatever you want. That doesn't mean anything. But I do believe this. This is my personal opinion on things. Where are the 12 tribes today? Your guess is as good as mine. We know that a good number of the Pashtun in Afghanistan are most likely of Jewish origins. The Cherokee here in Native America, most likely, from what we could see from James Adair's book written over 300 years ago, they, descendants of an Israelite bloodline. Judea, or earlier, or another tribe? Don't know. But the bloodline descendants of Reuben and Shimon and Gad and Asher and Naphtali and Zebulun and all the rest, they are as much children of Israel today as any of the children of Judah are today. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. Now, today I hear that we have all kinds of DNA tests, and they actually can check and discover the DNA of someone who is of the bloodline of Aaron the Kohen. How the heck they got a DNA marker for that? I have no idea. But somebody does. They claim that they have a DNA marker for the Davidic bloodline. Cool and groovy. Can they therefore define the genetic bloodlines for all the tribes? Maybe someday. And if that's the case, I mean, when we say when Mashiach comes, all the 12 tribes are coming back, I think we're going to be really, really surprised about who we discover really is the children of Israel, because it's certainly not going to be pasty, white-skinned Eastern Europeans speaking a dialect of Polish, Russian, German. But another time, another story for another time again. But where these people are today, we don't know. Take a look at the Beta Yisrael out of Ethiopia. Are they Jewish? They're Israelites. Are they actually from the tribe of Judea? Don't know. But they have a Masorah. Remember that tradition word? That dates back thousands of years. And when, well, they were warmly received. You get people like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef who warmly receives them. So they're no different from us. And indeed, they were embraced in Israel. Of course, Israel, like that modern secular state that it is, has its own problems. Racism, prejudice. And unfortunately, people who were not of Ashkenazi stock were then and still are, unfortunately, facing terrible prejudice. If you are Sephardic today, even if you're a pasty, white-skinned Sephardi, college-educated, PhD in the schools, or a great rabbi, you will still find prejudice and racism amongst Ashkenazim. So deep is this, it was even portrayed, very clearly so, in the popular Israeli television show Shtisel, Season 3, in which one of the Hasidic families, the young boy, fell in love with a Sephardi girl, and his mother went ballistic. I know that's true. That's not Achdut. That's not unity. And the people who come from outside and convert and join the community, they face, unfortunately, similar types of prejudice. But let's go back. The 12 tribes today and identifying them today, people all raise their hand and they say, we're this, we're that. Yeah, okay, you know what? There needs to be evidence. The law, the Code of Jewish Law, had to deal with this. Because before we had the debacle of Soviet Russia, which destroyed all the identity documents of Jews coming out of Russia, leaving so many Jews and others who came out of Russia today living in Israel. And many of them, we don't know who's Jewish and who's not. Big problem. But hundreds of years before this, you had the problems with the Spanish. Good old Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, Yamach Shemam, right? They're the ones who forced the conversions, the conversos, who then, many fled, came back, or wanted to come back to the Jewish community, but without any kind of evidence of their origins. What do you do with these Marranos? Well, according to most law, the Marranos were accepted without any kind of a documentation and they were welcomed back into the community. Many of the Russian Jews in modern-day Israel equally face these issues. But when we're trying to understand continuity in the community, what do we do now with secular Jews? People who come back and say, okay, I don't have proof of being an identity, of being Jewish. I can't prove that I'm Jewish. And at the same time, I'm not observant to being Jewish. So from all extent and purposes, the individual appears to be non-Jewish in total and wants to be accepted as a Jew. How can we then accept that individual, that there's no proof of their history? It's a problem. Under most circumstances, they will have to go through a conversion ceremony. Now, a conversion in Torah Judaism today goes back and has been continuous in its form and structure since the days of Shammai and Hillel, wherein which the individual, male or female, makes an obligation at Mount Sinai, symbolically speaking, Na'aseh v'nishma. We're going to observe all of the Torah, not just part of it, not just the modern interpretation of it, but as it really is. And this form of expression has become called today an Orthodox conversion to Judaism. It's funny. Those who really observe Torah Judaism are called Orthodox. And the only ones who don't call themselves Orthodox are the Torah observant themselves. I am a Shomer Mitzvot. That means I observe the commandments. I am called Orthodox. It's not a term I use to define myself, but a term others use to define me. Why? Because we stay true and faithful to the continuity of the system. Now, remember I talked about being embraced in a community. Can you believe in Judaism? Absolutely. Many, many times. I see this all the time. Right? People say, I believe in Judaism. But that does not make you a member of the community. If you want to be a member of the community, remember we talked about the nation of Israel, religion of Judaism, they're very different. You can believe in the religion of Judaism and not be a part of the nation. I'm not talking about, again, the secular nation. We're talking about part of the people. Well, if I join the people, which tribe am I joining? You don't become part of the tribe because that's really irrelevant now. All right, I'm going to get to the Jewish souls thing in just a minute. But you need to embrace the community, and it's a one-way ticket. You can't convert in and then leave. Once you're in, you're in. And you could become a bad Jew, an irreligious Jew, but you stay a member of the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. So therefore, no one can actually come and, in quote, convert themselves. Believe in Judaism? Absolutely. Become a Jew? That's very different. In order to become a recognized member of the community, you have to go through the appropriate authorities who will verify and confirm your identity. This is why we have what we call an Orthodox conversion to Judaism. And whatever that Orthodox rabbinate is going to dictate and direct you, that's what you do, period. Let me give you an interesting example. I have known converts from many different walks of life. Converts that were made in Europe, converts that were made in Israel, converts that were made here in the United States. And you will see that there is a commonality to them all. And at the same time, their individual communities have imposed specific things on them that other communities will not. Remember I said that in the context is subjective. But the converting authority must be there. You must follow the system. Now, who is appropriately authorized to convert? Well, according to the letter of the law, it can be any ordained rabbi. But that's not the real practice here. You need the appropriate authority, which we call an appropriate bet din. Now, I'm an ordained Orthodox rabbi, but I refuse to perform conversions because I am not a member of the courts that observe and do these things. So if anyone wants to convert, they have to go through those systems. Now, there's a question here. What about the conservative and reform conversions to Judaism? Well, at the risk of sounding, whatever, conservative and reform Judaisms are different religions. Conservative and reform Judaism should be looked at as different from Torah Judaism as Christianity and Islam. Why? Because they, neither one, embraces the concept which we outlined right from the beginning of Na'aseh v'nishma, the full observance and embrace of the continuity of the Torah tradition. Each one has breached and gone its own direction and validated it, and they have become completely different religions. And that's the truth of it. So it's not like they're just a difference of opinion here and there. They use all the words and make it sound ethnically, but their Judaism is not Torah Judaism. And for those who are amongst them who are honest, they'll admit that. But that's beside the point. Curious, when those anti-religious founders of the state of Israel fought long and hard to establish their state, people like David Ben-Gurion, one of the founding fathers, was so bitter against God. He absolutely refused to have a mention of God in the founding documents of the state of Israel. They absolutely refused. We don't want it. They made a compromise at the end, and they made a reference to the Rock of Israel. That's all they would do. And you would think that people with such animate distaste towards religion would be welcoming all these different forms and versions of a more modern expression of Judaism, a more watered down, which doesn't include the commandments like the Reform or conservative movements. But you go look in Israel today. The Reform and conservative movements are insignificant, and they have free reign to talk and do whatever they do, but their embrace is negligible. Because in Israel, in spite of the fact, however secular those Israelis are, however tough and mean and cruel that they are, they're not really cruel at all. They recognize what real Torah is. They recognize the true face of religion. And that's why they only recognize, for the most part, what we call the Orthodox. Don't think the Orthodox don't take undue advantage of that and cause all kinds of social strife, which they do. But that, again, is another topic for another time. But if you, as a non-Jew, want to be embraced by the greater Jewish community, and you think that you can take a, I'm going to use the term, and if it's a charged term, fine, so be it. If you think you can take a half-assed expression of Judaism in a watered-down version, and you don't have to keep the kosher laws or the Shabbat and all that, and you still call yourself Jewish, the greater Jewish community is not going to recognize you and is not going to embrace you as a Jew. As a fellow human being, with all the respect due you, absolutely. We don't deny respect to individuals because of differences. And even here at our KosherTorah School, right? I open our doors for absolutely everyone and anyone who wants to come and study. I don't care what you call yourself or what you view yourself. But what you're going to learn here is Torah, what you call Orthodox Judaism. That's why it's called kosher Torah. Kosher means the legitimate, true thing, the real deal. And I'm not going to take sides in political debates and all the kind of stuff like that. But I'm going to tell you like it is. And communal coherence is what is so vital. And that is why conversion today needs to be with an Orthodox, recognized Orthodox court, not just three guys getting together. And of course you have to go through the rituals of the mikveh, right? Its own original Jewish baptism.